With the downturn of China-U.S. relations over the past few years, bilateral people-to-people exchanges suffered too. Data show that Chinese students have been cooling on U.S. colleges and universities since the outbreak of the COVID pandemic. In contrast, universities in the UK, France, Germany and Russia are attracting more Chinese youths. Scholarly and other people-to-people exchanges also dropped, and a growing number of Confucius institutes were shut down in the U.S. as well. What happened with non-governmental exchanges? Has U.S. higher education lost its gleam, or there are other factors that impeded the civil exchanges? How can things pick up again? I had the opportunity to talk with Professor Xie Tao, Dean of the School of International Relations and Diplomacy at Beijing Foreign Studies University. Professor Xie, thank you very much for joining us. First of all, what is your understanding of the picture of people-to-people exchanges between China and America at the moment, especially when it comes to scholars and students?
I have to say that U.S.-China scholarly exchanges have come down to arguably the lowest point since Richard Nixon's visit in 1972. And you look at the numbers, for example, American scholars coming over to China after the pandemic was over, it's a very, very few of them have come over to China. And I would say the same also applies to the Chinese side, that very few Chinese scholars are going to the United States or have gone to the United States. I think probably the number on both sides are less or fewer than 100 up to now.
Wow, for the whole country, for
the
all
whole country, my counting starting period is when China opened up after the pandemic was over. That is starting from January 8th.
What was the original level, or what was the previous level? What is the level between China and European countries and the UK, for instance? How low is this 100?
This 100, to put this number in comparative perspective, I would say the number between China and the EU countries like China and France, China, Germany, or China, UK, I would say perhaps at least 5 or 6 times more than that between China and the United States. And one key reason is, of course, the very limited number of flights between the United States and China right now. You probably heard the number, Liu Shen, that before the pandemic, there are about 300 flights between China and the United States every week. Today, we have about 28 flights every week. That is about
less than 1/10.
Yeah. So because of the limited flights, and that means flight fares are very high, it's quite expensive. We're talking about 5,000 or 6,000 US dollars at least for round trip. And so that is a major factor that is prohibiting American and Chinese scholars from traveling to the other country.
What could be some other reasons that are also making people having second thoughts? Are we seeing invitations being given both ways as adequately as they used to be?
No, you're right, Liu Shen. You mentioned another key factor. I would say this is, in my view, much more important than the limited number of flights. That is the overall, I would say, hostile environment, especially in the United States, because there's this perception that the Chinese government would practice, quote unquote, wrongful detention of Americans coming over to China. And so if you noticed last week, the State Department issued a travel advisory to American citizens traveling to China. And one of the reasons cited by the State Department is so-called wrongful detention. So in there, you can see this fear of coming over to China. But of course, that fear is generated by exaggeration. I don't see like why the Chinese government is being accused of practicing wrongful detention. But that absolutely contributes to this unwillingness among American scholars to come over here.
What do you think could prompted the Biden administration, the relevant authorities under the Biden administration, to issue such a notice, especially when we are seeing efforts from the Biden administration to reach out to China? We have seen, right, a whole host of secretaries trying to meet or meeting with Chinese counterparts. But on the other hand, they're issuing this kind of directives, which is pulling in the opposite direction, it seems.
Right. For example, U.S. Secretary Antony Blinken was in Beijing a few weeks ago, and we know the U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen was in Beijing. So you can see that on the one hand, the U.S. government is sending out a clear signal that they want to promote U.S.-China people-to-people exchanges. I remember Secretary Antony Blinken said that the two governments will work together to increase flights. On the other hand, however, as I said, they do issue this, very scary travel advisory. And so for ordinary Americans and American scholars, when they see this, when they get this message, they would have obviously second thoughts. Why would I want to risk going to China, right? So it's very bad. Mm-hmm.
What is the impact or the legacy of the China initiative that started a couple of years ago, targeting people in the academia who have close collaboration or relationship with Chinese universities or research institutions? There have been several cases involving scientists or scholars of Chinese of Asian descent wrongly accused, but then in the end there was never an indictment or a case, but their lives have already been gravely disrupted, if not destroyed. Do you see that kind of initiative, that kind of atmosphere also contributing to the fear about appearing to come close to Chinese, especially official institutions?
Well, absolutely. I would say this kind of FBI's China initiative, even though it was officially suspended under the Biden administration, but it had a chilling effect on American scholars, especially of Chinese descent, or just the Chinese nationals who are doing research in America, because they would worry, they would become so concerned that anything that they share with their Chinese colleagues for pure academic purposes could be used as evidence against themselves, and it could be used in courts or by the Justice Department in their investigations against them. Absolutely chilling. And this applies not just to Chinese or Chinese Americans, Lucian. The story that I heard is that American scholars are also very concerned. So now they are kind of unwilling to take the step to reach out to their Chinese counterparts to conduct the scientific research.
What about students? For instance, you have a lot of students who are in foreign studies. I would imagine that many of them would have liked to go to the United States for study. Have they had second thoughts for all kinds of reasons, either economic consideration or the political atmosphere that's not so welcoming? Of course, the COVID has had an effect as well, but overall, do you see, because the trend, as I can tell, started already before kind of the pandemic?
My sense is that my students are still very keen to go to the United States, but they are at the same time very, very concerned about their own visa applications, about their safety in the United States, about whether they would be welcomed by their host institutions. So you are right. But there's this very conspicuous anxiety about going to America.
What about the other way around? The official statistics seem to point to the number of American studies studying China to only about 400 currently. That is a huge drop from about 10,000 that was before the pandemic started, which is already lower than before President Trump came into office, before the whole fiasco, right, about the tension between the two sides.
The number that I have is actually even lower than the one that you just cited. You say less than 400. The number I have is fewer than 300. I think it's around 285.
Wow.
Now, before pandemic, you mentioned like I think it's over 15,000 American students were studying in China. And so just 4 years later, you had fewer than 300. So this is absolutely a signal that American students are also very unwilling to come over to China.
What are the reasons? What could be, possibly driving that?
I was in the United States in January, in the past January for 3 weeks. I talked to a lot of my American counterparts and interlocutors. And what they told me is that they are just concerned about this, as I just mentioned, this so-called wrongful detention, hostile environment in China to Americans. They are somehow just have this, I would call this paranoia about being in China and being harassed or detained by the Chinese government. But of course, I don't know where they got this paranoia, like being so afraid of coming over to China. I don't know. I would say that perhaps it's because of this media stories from Fox News and from these social media stories about how American students and some American scholars were treated here. But of course, these stories could be totally false.
Do you think the situation will continue to get worse as we're entering also another election cycle? Or do you think it's pretty much as bad as it can get and slowly momentum will build up towards slightly warmer situation than the people-to-people front?
I think it will probably get better, but only slightly better in the coming months and up to the election cycle next year. I say this, I'm being more optimistic this time because you look at Anthony Blinken is here, Janet Yellen was here, and then my personal story that I met with a group of American scholars over the weekend. And so all these are, kind of encouraging signs that once you have these scholars go back to America and they tell their American colleagues, say, oh, no, 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 China is not what you guys think. You should go and travel to China. We had a great experience here.
What can be some of the things that can be done to help alleviate this kind of paranoia that you just mentioned on the part of the Chinese government? Do they genuinely welcome more scholarly exchange, more student exchange with the United States?
Absolutely. My understanding of Chinese government policy is that number one, as President Xi Jinping said, China is firmly committed to opening itself up to the outside world. China is committed to true globalization. So I think, one way perhaps we can do to send out a kind of a reassuring signal to Americans is that we can continue to invite delegations of American scholars, American students, and give them visas, make the visa application process easier, and give them more kind of freedom to travel around the country, and things like this. I think that they can trickle back to America, and so word of mouth and this could help people to assuage their kind of a fear and anxiety.
Yeah. Well, I hope, and I believe that you also hope too, that the situation can improve slowly but steadily. Many thanks to Professor Xie Tao from Beijing Foreign Studies University for sharing with us your insights.
Thank you for having me, Liu Xin.
Professor Xie Tao, Dean of School of International Relations and Diplomacy at Beijing Foreign Studies University. With that, we come to the end of this special edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, you can follow me on Facebook and Twitter using the handle Liu Xin in Beijing. On behalf of the whole team, thank you for watching. You've got The Point.